Let's begin by defining the term internal control system. Internal control system. So what's an ICS? Internal control system. Internal control system. This refers to the process. These refers to the process. This refers to the process designed and effected, designed and effected by those charged with the governance, management, and other personnel, to provide reasonable assurance, about the achievement of the entity's objectives, with regard to reliability, of financial reporting, effectiveness and efficiency, of operations, and compliance with the applicable laws, and regulations. Let's go to the components of internal control system. Components of internal control system. Components of internal control system. So ICS, you know, the 5 main components. The first one, we have a control environment. Control environment. The first component, control environment. The number 2, the entities, risk assessment process, Number 3, information system. The next, control activities. Then the last one, monitoring of control. monitoring, control. So those are the key components of the internal control system. They operate independently, and they contribute to the attainment of the internal control objectives, which is basically to ensure that there is efficiency in the conduct of the business operation, to show that the assets of the entity can be safeguarded, to show there is a mechanism to prevent and detect errors and fraud, to show the financial statements can be prepared in accurate and a timely manner. So you control the environment upper, it just the awareness, the attitude, the action taken by the managers to be able to put in place an effective control system. So now the factor that will influence how control system will be effective, but the behavior and the personality of the people who have been given that responsibility, the managers and the governing council. And for example, the operating style will influence the corporate culture encouraged by them, the entity will also have an influence on how the internal control system is effective. Last number 2 is a risk assessment process. We know Goma risk the probability of a failure. Business may not able to attain 1 or 2 of the set objectives. So there must be process put in place to keep on trying to evaluate how the risk of the enterprise is being managed. There should be a system that identifies the risk, do an evaluation of the risk to find out the extent they can adversely affect the entity, the loss of the entity may suffer should they take a place. Now, the department of the responsibility for the risk assessment in the internal audit. The internal audit function, the internal auditor function, that normally continuously appraise the enterprise risk and advise the managers on what action can they take to improve the situation. The number 3 we have an information system. So this is now the ICT system put in place. The ICT infrastructure put in place to support the timely communication. Now, come up with a timely communication, this one are also able to make effective decisions. Then for the control activities. So these are a bigger part of the ICS. Go through this on now some procedures, for some policies, for the guidelines we normally put in place. And they also form what we call the elements of the ICS. The elements of the ICS, the elements of ICS. ICS, the elements of the ICS, part of these are policies and the procedures. I shall be discussing them later. Allow us to for the monitoring of the control. Without managers checking on how the control systems are working, they may not be tell whether that system is effective. The control put in place could be meaningless if managers doesn't get to know whether they're contributing to the identified objectives. So shall I start with small of those components? Let's start with the number 1, control environment. Control environment. Control environment. Control environment. This sets out the tone. This sets out the tone. This sets out the tone. This sets out the tone of an organization. Of an organization. Of an organization. Influencing the control. Influencing the control. Influencing the control. It has elements such as, it has elements such as, it has elements such as, it has elements such as communication, communication, enforcement, enforcement of integrity, enforcement of integrity, enforcement of integrity, ethical values, ethical values, ethical values, commitment to competence, commitment to competence, etc. commitment to competence, etc. The control environment involves the control environment involves the control environment involves the control environment involves the general attitude, the general attitude, the general attitude, and awareness, and awareness, and awareness by the management, regarding the internal controls, regarding the internal controls, regarding the internal controls, and the importance to the entity, and the importance to the entity, and the importance to the entity, and the importance to the entity. So let's go to number 2, the entity risk assessment process. The entities risk assessment process. The entities risk assessment process. The entities risk assessment process. This is the process of identifying. This is the process of identifying. This is the process of identifying, recording and responding, recording and responding, recording and responding to the business risk, to the business risk, to the business risk that are relevant, that are relevant, that are relevant in the preparation, of financial statements, in the preparation of the financial statements. Once the risks have been identified, once the risks have been identified, once the risks have been identified, corrective measures should be taken. Corrective measures should be taken. Corrective measures should be taken to mitigate the risk. Corrective measures should be taken to mitigate the risk. Corrective measures should be taken to mitigate the risk. Then go to number 3, information system. Information system. Information system. Information system. This involves the hardware components. This involves the hardware components. This involves the hardware components. This involves the hardware components, software components, software components, software components, people, data and procedures, data and procedures, data and procedures, and other components, that provides information, for decision making, for decision making, for decision making. Then you go to control activities, number 4, control activities. Control activities. Control activities. These are policies and procedures. These are policies and procedures These are policies and procedures adopted by the client management, adopted by the client management, adopted by the client management, so as to achieve the control objectives, so as to achieve the control objectives, so as to achieve the control objectives, e.g. authorization, segregation, etc. Segregation, etc. We go to number 5, monitoring of controls. 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 This involves checking. This involves checking. This involves checking whether the controls adopted, are operating as intended, are operating as intended. It is the assessment. It is the assessment of the effectiveness of the client's ICS. 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 And let's go to the objectives of ICS. Objectives of ICS. Objectives of ICS. So what are the goals of putting in place an internal control system? Objectives of ICS. So point number 1, to ensure that the entity runs. To ensure that the entity runs in an orderly and efficient manner. In an orderly and efficient manner. In an orderly and efficient manner. The number 2, to safeguard the company assets. To safeguard the company's assets. To safeguard the company's assets against theft, misuse, and negligence. Misuse and negligence. Misuse and negligence. The number 3, to secure as far as possible. 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 The completeness and accuracy. The completeness and accuracy. The completeness and accuracy of the financial statements. The completeness and accuracy of the financial statements. The completeness and accuracy of the financial statements. Number 4, to ensure that the entity adheres to its own policies and procedures. To ensure that the entity adheres to its own policies and procedures. to its own policies and procedures. The number 5, to facilitate prevention, to facilitate prevention, detection, and correction of frauds and errors, and correction of frauds and errors, and correction of frauds and errors, and other material misstatements, and other material misstatements, and other material misstatements in the financial statements. In the financial statements. In the financial statements. So those are the objectives of the internal control system. So next, let's move on to the responsibilities of ICS. Responsibilities of ICS. Responsibilities of ICS. Responsibilities of ICS. So we do have a respective responsibility, your managers and also auditors, when it comes to the internal control system. One about the responsibility of designing the system, implementing the system, ensure the system is effective in all aspects. That's the manager's responsibility. They will determine which control policies and procedures that shall go into the designing or establishing an internal control system. Thereafter, put it into action and ensure that its operating efficiency is guaranteed throughout its use. The audit at the other end, they are responsible to ascertain the system, be able to understand how was that particular system designed, how does the system function, or how does the system operate, which various control policies and procedures do exist in such kind of a system. Auditors also have obligation to keep adequate recording documentation of the system. Now the last one, to be able to evaluate, to tell whether the controls put in place are effective to detect any form of material misstatements. So the managers are working on a primary responsibility. Whenever they fail to do so, what are some of them committed what? A crime. Whenever the managers are failed to in their obligation of putting a sound internal control system, they have committed a crime. For that case, they should be taken to a court to assist for some questions. This crime it also gives us what we call the 5 components of the internal control system. The mnemonic crime, whereby C, you can see we have control procedures. The C for control procedures. Now R, risk assessment. Then I, information systems. M, monitoring. And the last one, upper control what? Environment. The control environment. We get a PO7, CC, RIM. CC, RIM. So what are the control components? The CC, RIM. Control environment, control procedures, risk assessment, information, and monitoring. So let's now put something on the responsibility of internal control system. The primary responsibility of instituting an effective and operational system of the internal control rest with the management of the company. 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 The management and directors the management and directors of the company, the management and directors of the company, the management and directors of the company also have the following responsibilities, also have the following responsibilities, also have the following responsibilities with respect to accounting, with respect to accounting, with respect to accounting and ICS, with respect to accounting and ICS. So one, ensuring that the company keeps, ensuring that the company keeps, ensuring that the company keeps proper books of accounts, ensuring that the company keeps proper books of accounts, ensuring that the company keeps proper books of accounts. Number two, ensuring that financial statements, ensuring that financial statements, ensuring that financial statements are in agreement, with the books of accounts, with the books of accounts, with the books of accounts. The number three, ensuring that adequate disclosures are made, ensuring that adequate disclosures are made, ensuring that adequate disclosures are made in the financial statements, in the financial statements, in the financial statements. Number four, selecting and applying accounting policies, selecting and applying accounting policies, selecting and applying accounting policies that are in agreement, that are in agreement, that are in agreement with the gaps, that are in agreement with the gaps, that are in agreement with the gaps, that are in agreement with the gaps. Five, detecting frauds and errors, detecting frauds and errors, detecting frauds and errors, and other material misstatements, and other material misstatements, and other material misstatements in the financial statements, in the financial statements, in the financial statements. Six, ensuring that the company complies, ensuring that the company complies, ensuring that the company complies with the legal requirements, ensuring that the company complies with the legal requirements, ensuring that the company complies with the legal requirements. Let's go to importance of ICS to the client. 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 So how beneficial is the internal control system to the client or the owners of the business? Whenever it's sound, what benefits are they likely to get? So one, it enables the management to run a company. It enables the management to run a company. It enables the management to run a company. It enables the company, it enables the management to run the company in an orderly and efficient manner. In an orderly and efficient manner. In an orderly and efficient manner. so that will ensure that there is a right structure in place. There is an organized way of doing things. Everything has been planned for where it's supposed to be at the right time, the right hands, doing the right things, and also for the proper deployment of the available resources. If you call there is an optimality in their utilization. Number two, it helps to safeguard the company assets. It helps to safeguard the company assets. It helps to safeguard the company's assets against theft, misuse and negligence, misuse and negligence, misuse and negligence, misuse and negligence. Number three, it ensures that the entity achieves. It ensures that the entity achieves the overall objectives. It ensures that the entity achieves the overall objectives. It ensures that the entity achieves the overall objectives. Next, it ensures that frauds and errors. It ensures that frauds and errors. It ensures that frauds and errors. It ensures that frauds and errors and other material misstatements and other material misstatements and other material misstatements are detected and prevented. Are detected and prevented. Are detected and prevented. Are detected and prevented. Next, it ensures completeness and accuracy. It ensures completeness and accuracy. It ensures completeness and accuracy of the company records. Of the company's records. Of the company's records. Then the last one, it ensures that the company complies with the laid down rules. It ensures that the company complies with the laid down rules. It ensures that the company complies with the laid down rules. It ensures that the company complies with the laid down rules. Now let's go to the importance of ICS to the auditor. Importance of ICS to the auditor. Importance of ICS to the auditor. So we are aware of auditors. They have a responsibility to express an opinion on the financial statement. And one of the influence, it will go how effective the internal control system it is. At the point of beginning the audit, they have to determine which approach are they going to use based on the nature of the ICS, either the system-based audit approach, the voting-based audit approach, or the risk-based auditor approach. So the internal control system, it has got an influence to the auditor. It can expose an auditor to a number of risks if auditors are not able to take much care enough in doing proper risk assessment of the internal control system put in place. Like when we are looking at the three components of risk, we have to put a risk of material misstatements, now to put a detection. So much of this was they affect the financial statements, which can be materially misstated, containing errors and the fraud, which sometimes the auditor's own procedures will not be able to detect. So part of this particular stuff is because of what the weaknesses in the internal control system. So ICS has got a bigger influence to the auditors on how they're going to obtain sufficient appropriate evidence and be able to conclude on the financial statements where they are free from any form of material misstatement. For that case, auditors have a duty to play when it comes to ascertaining, recording, and evaluating the internal control system are put in place. So number one, it reduces the number of audit tests. it reduces the number of audit tests. It reduces the number of audit tests and procedures which are required to be performed. 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 Yes, tunakumbuka hiyo ya evaluation. Kuna two possible outcome. Strong ama ICS iko. Coming iko strong, system-based audit approach is being adopted. And what's the implication of the procedure? Limited substantive procedures. Coming weak, the volume-based. In that case, increase substantive procedure. So when the ICS is good, a few number of tests and the procedures will be performed by the auditor. Number two, it reduces the sample size. It reduces the sample size. It reduces the sample size. It reduces the sample size, which is to be tested. Which is to be tested by the auditor. By the auditor. Where the system is operational and effective. Is operational and effective. Is operational and effective. Is operational and effective. Number three, it reduces the auditor's exposure to risk. It reduces the auditor's exposure to risk. It reduces the auditor's exposure to risk because there will be less fraud and errors. Because there will be less fraud and errors. Because there will be less frauds and errors. Number four, it helps the auditor in achievement of the audit objective. It helps the auditor in the achievement of the auditor objective. It helps the auditor in the achievement of the auditor objective. Next, it reduces the quantity of audit evidence. It reduces the quantity of audit evidence. It reduces the quantity of audit evidence. It reduces the quantity of audit evidence, which is required to be gathered by the auditor. Which is required to be gathered by the auditor. Which is required to be gathered by the auditor. Which is required to be gathered by the auditor. Then the last one, it influences the auditor's opinion. 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 So let's now move on to limitations of ICS. Limitations of ICS. Limitations of ICS. Limitations of ICS. So under limitations, two are the obvious ones. We have the obvious limitations, which we normally refer to them as the inherent limitation. So no matter how effective, elaborate, and internal control system it is, but it acquires some of those weaknesses. There's a possibility that the auditor will not still be able to detect some form of the material misstatements. So we shall begin by number one. It is expensive to implement. 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 So yes, anything which is being done consume resources, is about time, money, and any other resources. So ICS also being a laboratory process It's quite very expensive, especially for a small company. It's very expensive to implement an ACS. The those similar functions whereby there should be segregation of them. The person who does this should not be able to do this. Here, those particular functions can be done by one person from the very beginning to the end, in the end, the transaction processing. For a small company to implement this kind of control measures would not be cheaper for them, to be quite very expensive. So ICS by their nature, they're expensive to implement. They come with additional cost or overhead to the company. Number two, if not properly implemented, it lowers the employees' morale. It lowers the employees' morale. Let's say these are department or a section, A class up. So kuna staff who have been working here. Then all of a sudden, as a manager, umekuja na policy ya kuweka CCTV camera hapa. Just as a control measures. Utaka kujua kwa purity anaingia saa ngapi, purity anatoka saa ngapi. If that measure is not well communicated with the staff, they may not understand why are these measures being put forward. So sometimes when the managers implement these measures, staff think they're meant to do what? To monitor them. This is not the case. Just meant to show over this. Some good things can happen to the what? To the entity. So anytime managers come with this initiative, the staff must be involved in the process and being told why are they putting the control measures in place. So poor implementation may not contribute to the attainment of the ICS objectives. Number three, management may overrely on the ICS. Management may overrely on the ICS. Management may overrely on the ICS. Management may overrely on the ICS and fail to supervise their work. And fail to supervise their work or junior employees. Or junior employees. Or junior employees. Then the last one, number four, rigid systems. Rigid systems which lack flexibility, they discourage creativity, and development of new ideas. And let's go to inherent limitation of ICS. Inherent limitation of ICS. Inherent limitation of ICS. So one, cost. Number one, cost. The management will be willing. The management will be willing to implement a system. Which gives high benefits, as compared to the cost of the system, Some internal controls may not be instituted. Some internal controls may not be instituted. Some internal controls may not be instituted by the company, since they are very expensive to acquire. By the company, since they are very expensive to acquire. By the company, since they are very expensive to acquire. By the company, since they are very expensive to acquire. The number two, circumvention. 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 Yes, come on, just like using the control server. Somebody described this way. We may circumvent, we may try to avoid the controls. And try to find some form of bypass to override the controls put in place. So we find companies that have very good policies in place, but who are able to come up with ways on how to circumvent them or to navigate the void, interact with the policies and procedures that put in place. So controls can be circumvented. Controls can be circumvented. Controls can be circumvented through avoidance, by the company employees and officers. By the company's employees and officers. By the company's employees and officers. The number three, human error. Human error. Human error. Human error. Human error. Controls require human intervention. Controls require human intervention. Controls require human intervention. Hence, they can be limited. Hence, they can be limited. Hence, they can be limited by the fact that human beings are careless. Human beings are careless and ignorant. Human beings are careless and ignorant. Human beings are careless and ignorant. The number four, abuse. Abuse. Number four, abuse. Controls can be abused. Controls can be abused. Controls can be abused by company officers, by company officers, by company officers, and employees, with whom they have been entrusted, with whom they have been entrusted, with whom they have been entrusted, with whom they have been entrusted. The number five, collusion. Number five, collusion. 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 The company officers and employees. The company officers and employees. The company officers and employees. The company's officers and employees can collude with each other, to beat the system, can collude with each other to beat the system. can collude with each other to beat the system, hence limiting the effectiveness of the system, hence limiting the effectiveness of the system, hence limiting the effectiveness of the system. The number 4, inadequacy. Inadequacy. The fact that there is no system, the fact that there is no system of ICS, that can guarantee its effectiveness, that can guarantee its effectiveness and that it is adequate, it limits the operating effectiveness. It limits the operating effectiveness of the system. It limits the operating effectiveness of the system. So let me go for subtopic: ascertaining the accounting and internal control system. Ascertaining the accounting and internal control system. Ascertaining the accounting and internal control system. So that to ascertain is now to be able to understand how the system is operating. There are a number of techniques that auditors can use to ascertain the system. Like one, we find what you call observation. Be physically present and observe how a particular procedure is being done. With that one, they're able to tell how the system is being operated. Another one is to go through maybe the interviews. They give questions to the staff or the officers of the entity, and they're also able to get understanding how the ICS work. The other one, they can read what you call the procedural manuals. Those manuals which are used to develop such kind of a system. We will provide a technical information to the auditors to enable them to understand how the system was constructed. In Guinea, one has to review the previous audit working papers. Another one, they can perform a walkthrough test and any other relevant test which can enable them to understand how the system was built. So what do you mean by the term ascertaining? So ascertaining the ICS refers to 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 ways by which auditors gets to know the internal controls operating in a company. The internal controls operating in a company. The internal controls operating in a company. The following methods are used to ascertain. The following methods are used to ascertain. The following methods are used to ascertain whether or not, controls are present in an organization. Controls are present in an organization. Controls are present in an organization. So one, observation. Yes, it's realistic because he has to know what's happening. He's observing the procedures. Determine which controls are present. Number two, interviews. So support interview nani employees to get to know which control measures are in place. Three, procedural manuals. Is the documents maybe system development, they'll be able to tell which controls resides in such kind of a system. They'll be able to tell which controls resides in such kind of a system. Next, reviewing previous working papers. Yeah, so through that one, they'll be able to ascertain the various controls in operation. By just checking the previous audit working papers, they'll be able to ascertain the controls in operation. Next is internal audit function. Internal auditor function. So one of the responsibilities of the internal auditors, they could review the ICS. So from their report, if the auditor can take that report and do a review, they'll be able to understand the nature of the ICS put in place by the client. By reviewing the internal auditor's report, or reviewing the internal auditor's documents, they'll be able to understand the nature of the ICS are put in place. Next one is the walkthrough test. Walkthrough test. So transaction normally prepared from the very start to the end. Kuna stages in between. The stages of a transaction: processing. There's a maybe kuna recording. There's a maybe kuna casting that transaction. There's a kuna part of maybe reconciliation, like that. So auditors can be able to test those particular stages of transaction processing within a given cycle to tell the nature of the controls are put in place. You just select a few transactions, then you walk through that part of the transaction processing, just to be able to tell whether there were controls in the areas of the transaction processing. So we can go to documenting the ICS or recording the ICS. Documenting the ICS or recording the ICS. So as an auditor, people like to know whether you understand the ICS put in place. You should be able to demonstrate that knowledge, understanding of the internal control system are put in place. So how will you demonstrate that you understand the ICS put in place? Through what we call the documenting the ICS. So documenting the ICS is now a way for auditors to tell people, yes, this is how I understand the system. There are techniques which auditors can use as a way of documenting the system. Like what we call the narrative notes, a short notes prepared by the auditor describing the system, giving system a history, giving system procedures, giving system features here and there. I love to what we call the flow charts. Flow charts are very effective. For some reason, it's also the diagrams. In the diagrams, they are able to give a pictorial representation of the system. A pictorial representation of the system, trying to show the various procedures of how the documents do flow in such kind of a system. The other one to call the internal control questionnaires. Questionnaires are a list of questions. These are questions which are going to some responses regarding the system put in place. So I think that this refers to recording of ICS after ascertainment. 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 The following are the methods used. The following are the methods used. The following are the methods used in documenting the ICS. In documenting the ICS. In documenting the ICS. Number one, narrative notes. Narrative notes. Narrative notes. Number two, flow charts. Flow charts. Flow charts. Number three, internal control questionnaires. Internal control questionnaires. Internal control questionnaires. ICQ. ICQ. Then four, internal control evaluation questionnaires. Internal control evaluation questionnaires. Internal control evaluation questionnaires is ICEQ. 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 Then number five, organization charts. Organization charts. Organization charts. So let's take some few minutes break. Narrative notes. This is a method of documenting the ICS. This is a method of documenting the ICS. This is a method of documenting the ICS. This is a method of documenting the ICS by use of descriptive notes. By use of descriptive notes. By use of descriptive notes. Which are auditors' short notes? Which are auditors' short notes? Which are auditors' short notes? Describing the system. Which are auditors' short notes? Describing the system. Which are auditors' short notes? Describing the system. They are ideal for small companies. 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 The next, go to flow charts. Flow charts. Number two, flow charts. Flow charts. These are diagrammatic representations. These are diagrammatic representations. These are diagrammatic representation of the company's procedures. Of the company's procedures. Of the company's procedures and processes. And processes. Flowcharts are designed. Flowcharts are designed Flowcharts are designed to show movement, of documents, in the processing stage. Standardized symbols are used. Standardized symbols are used to represent the flow, of documents and information, through the system. The flowchart should be kept simple. 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 The flowchart should be kept simple so that the overall structure or flow is clear at the first sight. Any gaps in the flowcharts, are an indication of weaknesses in the internal control system, and vice versa. Flowcharts are ideal for large entities. Flowcharts are ideal for large entities. Our next organization charts. Organization charts. It is a diagrammatic representation. It is a diagrammatic representation of the flow of command, authority and responsibility, within an organization. It normally documents the formal relationship within the entity and all other informal relationship and all other informal relationship and all other important informal relationship. However important to big organization. Then we go to internal control questionnaire. Internal control questionnaire. Internal control questionnaire. ICQ. Internal control questionnaire. ICQ. Internal control questionnaire. ICQ. It is a list of short questions. It is a list of short questions. It is a list of short questions requiring short answers. Requiring short answers. Requiring short answers. And the answers to the questionnaire is either, and the answers to the questionnaire is either, and the answers to the questionnaire is either, and the answer to the questionnaire is either yes, yes, no, or sometimes not applicable. Yes, no, or sometimes not applicable. Yes, no, or sometimes not applicable. In most audit firms, ICQ exists in form of standardized audit working papers, of standardized audit working papers, in areas such as stock, and work in progress, stock and work in progress, sales and debtors, salaries and wages, purchases and creditors, ICQ concentrates on the objective that the system seeks to achieve. They ascertain the system. In terms of strength. They ascertain the system in terms of strength, weaknesses, or absence of controls. Weaknesses or absence of controls. Weaknesses or absence of controls. Weaknesses or absence of controls. Then you go to internal control evaluation questionnaire. Internal control evaluation questionnaire, ICQ. Internal control evaluation questionnaire, ICQ. Internal control evaluation questionnaire, ICQ. ICQ. An ICQ is a modified ICQ. An ICEQ. An ICQ is a modified ICQ which uses key control questions. Which uses key control questions. Which uses key control questions. If the system in operation, if the system in operation is not achieving the objectives, it should be documented. It should be documented by the use of an ICQ. By the use of an ICEQ. By the use of an ICQ. The key control questions are questions based on the objectives. Are the questions based on the objectives? Are the questions based on the objectives? That the system seeks to achieve. That the system seeks to achieve. That the system seeks to achieve. ICQ do not concentrate. ICQ do not concentrate. ICQ do not concentrate or focus on the strength or weaknesses or focus on the strength or weaknesses as it is the case of ICQ, as it is in the case of ICQ, but as it is in the case of ICQ. Sasa tofauti between these two forms of the questionnaires. Hii hapa ya kwanza sana sana is about a question as controls exist. Answer about existence of the controls. The controls do exist. What we are some of the effectiveness of the controls are effectiveness. There's a difference in those two forms of the questionnaire. One confirms the controls are in existence. Are they in place? Are the number of controls in place? For example, segregation duties, authorization procedures, are they in place? This one confirms how effective are they in terms of how they operate. Do they have the capability of detecting material misstatements and having them being corrected? I will defend my work on why So running up was subtopic, responsibility of the external auditors, responsibility of the external auditors, responsibility of the external auditor with regard to ICS, responsibility of the external auditor with regard to ICS. So one, to obtain an understanding. Number one, to obtain an understanding. To obtain an understanding of the client internal control system. To obtain an understanding of the client internal control system. To obtain an understanding of the client internal control system. The number two, to record or document the system. To record or document the system. To record or document the system. Number three, to evaluate the system. To evaluate the system. To evaluate the system about their effectiveness. About their effectiveness. About their effectiveness. So as to determine the extent of reliance. So as to determine the extent of reliance. So as to determine the extent of reliance to place on the system. So as to determine the extent of reliance to place on the system. Next, to identify and record. To identify and record the weaknesses in the system. To identify and record the weaknesses in the system. To identify and record the weaknesses in the system. The next, to provide recommendations. To provide recommendations for improvement. For improvement in the management letter. Then next, to report to the shareholders. To report to the shareholders. To report to the shareholders and those charged with the governance. And those charged with the governance. And those charged with the governance where the weaknesses persist. Where the weaknesses persist. So the look up for subtopic management letters. Management letter. Management letter. Management letter. Sasa kama auditor shall evaluate the ICS, they've been able to identify the weaknesses. Those weaknesses need to be communicated to the managers and also providing possible recommendation. So one of the letter auditors shall use to highlight those weaknesses and the possible recommendation in each of the management letter. Now, 10-year letter It also varies. It can be sent twice during the period of the audit, one at the interim period, and the other one at the final audit period. So ikitumwa at the point of the interim, immediately after the interim period is complete, so that the managers can respond to the IECS weaknesses and implement the recommendations outlined by the auditor. They draw the letter of the internal control weaknesses. The letter of the internal control weaknesses. The ikitumwa was now the end of the final audit, letter on any, the management letter. So it's a requirement as per the standard kwamba auditors should always do a copy of this particular letter, then send it to the client for action. Also, in line with the weaknesses identified by the auditors, and now they should be able to improve the weaknesses of the internal control system. Sasa wacha tukomea hapo leo, alafu we shall continue from that management letter in the next meeting.